Hello and welcome to another War Stories with B-Rax. It is November 8th, 2020. I'm got a nice warm cup of coffee and I'm going to continue with episode 6, explaining some stuff. In today's episode, I plan on giving a really brief chronological story, but then I really want to dive into the details of a patrol. Because I'm sort of just saying things, and one of my buddies who was in the army, Rangers, he basically told me, hey, like, normal people aren't going to understand when you say, oh, we jumped on a patrol, we went here, we jumped. So I'm going to try to get into the step-by-step procedure and sort of what it's like to patrol in the city, unchronologically. So it's just going to be data. But so when I left off, I think that we had just had the day with a very tense situation in our platoon, um, when we lost 3 Marines from Golf Company when a Humvee was hit by an IED. And that was somewhere in mid-November, um, after I had taken a vacation to a random army base and was exposed to a completely different type of war. I guess that's some people's war. But so the Lance Corporal Underground is almost always right. And so we started hearing murmurs and rumors through the Lance Corporal Underground that there was going to be a big battle coming up, and that we were going to, um, well, first there was a rumor that we were going to get sent home early, and my parents can attest to that. They were told that we were going to get sent home early. I might have mentioned that in the last episode, but then it came down like, no, actually, uh, we're going to clear the city house by house, street by street, Fallujah style or Hue City style. And obviously, we were all stoked on that because the Battle of Fallujah was a huge victory for the Marine Corps, a huge victory for the United States. Um, it was one of the rare situations of black and white where the bad guys occupy the city. Most of the civilians evacuated the city. We gave them a chance to evacuate because we didn't want to we didn't want to hurt innocent people as much as we could. And the bad guys stuck around, and we basically killed every single one of them. I think the Marines killed like between 2 and 3,000, and they only lost 91 because the safest time for Marines is when you're getting some. It's the kind of patrolling around that I'd say is when you're really just at risk because you can get hit from every direction, you're not paying attention all the time. But when you're clearing house by house, street by street, and they had tanks and a couple army brigades with Bradleys, they were able to take care of business. And so we had heard through the rumor mill that we were going to get augmented by 2-4, so that's 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, and they were on a MEU, so they're floating around on boats, and then they came, and I remember watching them from the old TCP with CH-53 helicopters with giant like cargo bags hung underneath them, like slung underneath them. I mean, could probably fit like a car inside the bag, like massive bags of just boxes and supplies and ammo and building supplies. And they set up their base on the other side of the river to the south of Fox Company. Um, and I just watched all day helicopters fly in, drop some stuff off, fly out, fly in, drop some stuff off, fly out, while they set up. And we also heard that we were going to get tanks. We also heard, and they began. Um, Actually, they didn't begin it until right before, but we heard that they were going to berm around the city, and we were going to put our scout snipers from the battalion out in the desert to make sure nobody goes over the berm in or out. And then we were going to basically lock down the city and then clear it house by house, street by street. We were going to get tanks. We were all really excited because we wanted a little bit of payback for all the casualties that we had taken. So I'm going to leave that there. And now I've got a list right here. And this is the best of my knowledge. I'm going to try to stick to this and try to give a good explanation of a typical patrol. Obviously, there were weird ones where they're like, "Hey, jump in the back of the truck with this platoon because we're going to go down to this random village in the middle of nowhere and try to clear it or do something or whatever, do a blocking position for this tiny little operation." Or if you watch the YouTube video that I just posted, like, "Hey, you got to go clean up after special forces because they caught guys sleeping in RAO." Um, so, but the typical patrol, what we did for those 2 weeks when we were on the patrolling cycle, it started with the warning order. And so when you're doing normal operations, like a division fighting a big enemy, like, World War II style or even Desert Storm style, you get or the invasion of Iraq or Afghanistan, you get a warning order. They go, "Hey, unit leader," whether it's a squad size unit or a platoon or even a company or a battalion, or it could even be a whole division, like, "Stand by, in the next 6 hours you're going to get an order to clear this city, so start taking a look at it. Get yourself oriented to the map, understand the situation, what are your adjacent units, what are your supporting units." um, and I'll get a little bit into that. And so we replaced the warning order because it was like a thing. You would get it. You get called in the office and they would tell you it. So they replaced that with a schedule board. And if you've read anything about counterinsurgency operations, which I had read the pubs for, you basically need a constant presence and you need overlapping AOs. So a good example of that is Echo Company was to our north, and instead of having a street or a northing where we neither of us cross it, we actually overlap by a couple blocks in either direction. And we have, I mean, just like you could say, I don't know if police do the same thing in New York City, but you basically had, yeah, they had a different commander than us, but we overlapped for a couple blocks in each direction. So the schedule was pretty well thought out, and this is something that I really agreed with, and I've mentioned it before that a lot of people were kind of tired and they were kind of pissed off, like, why do we always got to be patrolling and stuff? And it's sort of common sense. You just got to do that. You got to always have boots on the ground. You got to always be out there. Um, so then it would usually be the squad leader and our point man would go before the rest of the squad. They'd go to the briefing room and they would draw out a map overlay. So they'd take a clear piece of like cellophane or cellophane. I don't know, the stuff that you use on like the overhead projectors for those of you that are my age or older, that teachers used to use back in the day. You basically tape one of those up on the map. You draw your route out, and then that's what you give to the like we take a copy, and then we also give a copy to the command, the control, the COC, Command Operations Center. And that way they know where we're going to be at all times. They have a general understanding. They can look at it and say, okay, yeah, that's covering the sector that we need covered in this patrol. um, and then they'd be finishing that up as the rest of the squad came into the briefing room, which, if you watch the video that I posted, there's like a big map on the board, and it kind of had like church pews almost. So we all come in there and we start doing our radio checks and everything during this time, those of us radio operators, and then squad leader gives us the brief. And there's a certain like the Marine Corps, we have a certain way that you give the brief, and OSMEAC, so orientation, situation, mission, execution, admin, and logistics and communications. And so the O is orientation. Obviously, we knew where we were, so it wasn't as important. It's like this is Haklania, we're in Iraq. Um, Situation was kind of like you went over, hey, what's the worst thing that can happen on this patrol? Uh, what's the worst thing the enemy can do to us on the patrol? What's the most likely thing the enemy is going to do to us on this patrol? Whether it be IED initiated ambush, which was basically always the worst case scenario, but the usual was pop shots, random hand grenade, sniper, or just an IED with no ambush afterwards. Um, and then so that was that was situation, and then mission was you basically were saying, hey, we're doing a contact patrol in this sector, which you could also say is a security patrol. But they basically decided at some point that every one of our patrols was a contact patrol because we were out looking for a fight. Um, we were looking for the enemy. They had to come out to play. We couldn't just shoot random people. Um, and so that's how that worked. And then execution is basically like we're gonna roll with this formation. We always use a tactical column. We'll get into that's on the list a little bit later. Um, we're gonna handle the danger areas with the bump method. We're gonna have uh, hand and arm signals for different or brevity codes for hey, this is an IED or this is this like kind of make a bursting bomb with your hand. That means like hey, we see an IED, but you don't want to say anything so that they don't trigger it if they're listening. Um, and then admin logistics. That's where you basically said uh, this is the chain of command. So you got the squad leader. Who takes over if he gets hit? Who's in charge of carrying what? Like who's got the extra batteries for the radio? Who's got the litter? Because I think we always patrolled with a foldable litter or a soft litter, which is basically a stretcher for carrying wounded people. Um, and then the C was communications, command and communications. That was like, hey, this is our radio frequency. Which on that deployment we actually use frequency hop, which is pretty cool. So not only was it we used crypto, which it's digital, and this is above my head. I knew how to make it work on the radio, and I knew how to input it into the radio. But I mean, it's like it uses like super crazy algorithms to take the voice, change it into data, ones and zeros, and then scramble it through a math equation. And then if you have the same crypto on the other end, you can unscramble it and you can hear what's getting said. So then another level, and the first deployment was the only deployment we used this, because I think that we weren't fighting an enemy that needed this. But frequency hop is basically the radio changes its frequency every second, so it's constantly changing, and this became a huge pain in the ass because some of the radios would the time would slip, like the clock would be a little bit like every second on this radio's clock was a little bit longer than this radio's clock, so you'd be constantly like adjusting that and calling somebody, and you could like link if you told this is hard to explain. So you could hear basically within 5 seconds or 15 seconds there was a certain small amount of time where as soon as you got past that you couldn't hear it anymore. But as you reached it, the quality started to get worse. And then all of a sudden, the two clocks are too far away. So as you heard it getting worse, and as an experienced radio operator, you kind of just knew. So you would ask for a radio check, and then you could plug some stuff into the radio, punch some buttons, and when they answered your radio check, your clock would automatically sync with their clock. And I mean, this was super cool technology back in the day. Now everybody's got smartphones and stuff and GPSs in their watch. Like I just bought a watch GPS. But back then we had a a big Garmin GPS that gave you a grid and a radio. So that pretty much does it for the actual brief format. That might have been kind of boring for some of you. So then we would step outside the briefing room and we would do what was called PCCs and PCIs. So that was it's one thing, and so the Marine Corps envisions you to do a PCC like with your fire team leader at the hooch, and then a PCI after the brief, and so that stands for actually I don't know what that stands for. Pre combat check and pre combat inspection, I believe. Um, and basically all it is making sure that each individual Marine has the personal gear that they're supposed to carry, and that the squad has all the squad gear that needs to be carried. And so you basically had like a laminated card, and you'd go down the list, and we'd all be online. Squad leader would be standing there, and he'd go, "Everybody got your helmet? All right, that's obvious. Everybody got your neck protector? That's obvious. Everybody got your SAPI plates in?" And he would actually go and because people would take them out because they're heavy and uncomfortable. We never did, but I'm guessing that's a problem. So he would bang on your plates in your vest to make sure you had them. Um, and then you would get to the squad stuff. So he'd be like GPSs, and so then there was like two of us that carried GPSs, and then extra batteries for the GPS, and you'd hold them up, or it'd be like sledgehammer and bolt cutters, like breaching gear, and someone would hold it up, or the soft litter that I mentioned earlier, or radio, extra batteries, extra radio, like backup radio, extra batteries for that. Um, Night vision goggles. Like you made sure everybody had everything that we needed on the patrol. And I touched on squad gear because we basically like who's got the two AT4s, which that's a shoulder launched one time use like rocket. Kind of looks like a bazooka if you know anything about history, like World War II. Um, so then, okay, we get the blessing. We head up to the clearing barrel, which I think if you watched the video, you saw the barrel where someone, that's where we all racked together. Because we used to do it individually, but there's people close enough to the base where they can hear and count how many people go condition one by putting a round in the chamber. And so we'd intercept stuff sometimes where they're like, hey, 14 people are about to leave the wire, or however many. So we had a system where we'd all get online, we'd all aim at the deck, and then it'd be like 3, 2, 1, and we'd all rack at once. And so no one could be listening and tell how many people are about to leave the wire. That's also commonly used when you're doing mobile stuff, as it's usually like 3, 2, 1, and everybody start their engine at the same time, because otherwise you could hear like one tank turn on, second tank turn on, or truck turn on, so you could hear how many things are about to happen. So during this time, like right after that, as the radio operator, I'd call in and I'd request permission to leave the wire, and they would uh I mean, 99.9% of the time they'd grant us, but if something changed or something like that, that's when they'd be like, hey, senior squad leader of the COC, and then they'd work on something, and then, you'd basically be like, 12 packs requesting permission to leave the wire, and they'd say, granted. So then we would start leaving the wire, which there's like a serpentine of C wire or barbed wire, and you would snake through that, and then as you rolled out, you'd start getting into your formation. And the most common formation that we used on that deployment, which is kind of the formation that we always use in urban situations, is a tactical column. And basically all that is you have two lines of people on either side of the road, kind of hugging the buildings, um, but they're staggered. So it's like if you were to draw a line between all the different Marines, it'd be point man, kind of more in the center than everybody else, and then he'd basically do a zigzag down the road, and so that way you aren't in a ranger file, which you can get taken out by like a machine gun to your front, or if you're in a straight line, like a skirmisher line, where you're basically all shoulder to shoulder moving forward, obviously spread out, but they both have their advantages and disadvantages. And in an urban environment, the tactical column's the best because as we get hit with something, like from the front or from the side, everyone's at least somewhat close to cover. Like you have a corner to take, or something like that. Um, so as we'd be patrolling, there'd be, everyone's looking at every window. Everybody's aiming, kind of checking every window, looking down every alley. Everybody's pieing it off, is what we called it, and basically you're like cutting the hole or the thread into like pie slices. As you move past it, you're starting looking in the far side, and then as you're leaving, you're looking sort of back into the window or into the doorway or into the little alleyway or whatever it is. Um, but anytime you got to like a road crossing or a field crossing, um, it was what we call a danger area. And so there's different types. They're all basically the same thing, but you have a linear danger area. So like if you come perpendicular to a road, and this could be in a forest or coming down like a urban area, and then you get to like a boulevard, and so you look right or left, and the enemy can hit you and shoot at you for a long ways in either direction, and you just need to cross over. And so we would basically, someone would post up, like the point man would stop, the 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 and we usually sent two across at once. So the point man second guy would stop, the two people behind them would take the corner, and then, or the back, there's different ways of doing it, and it kind of depends on the danger area. But sometimes if it's a big one, you'd bring the last guys up, like we'd all halt, they'd bring the guys in the back of the formation up, they'd cover down the road, and then the rest of the squad would move over two by two, and they'd set up security on the other side. And so then everybody's covered as you run across, and then you would take over security on the other side, and the squad would start moving forward at the same speed that we were going before we sprinted across. Um, that one probably needs a visual a visual aid. Um, but we basically got in a really good rhythm where everyone knew exactly what to do. You would basically, like, we would never slow down or speed up. It felt like everything we got good enough to where, yeah, within the squad, kind of like a millipede's legs, I guess you could say. Like within the squad, yeah, we'd have this little hurdle that we had to get over, but the squad itself would just continue moving at the same speed. And that has to do also with like walls. And so sometimes we'd draw our route going through people's houses. And so we'd basically, there'd be like a 6 foot wall or 8 foot wall, and we'd kind of do the same thing, and we would just hop the wall, and we became so good at it, and we just do it all day. We'd just be hopping these walls, and then you'd go to the back of the house and you'd hop their other exterior wall, and then you'd go through the other yard and then get to the edge of their yard and then hop a wall and then cross the street. So it's just like danger area after danger area after danger area after danger area. And you would sometimes you get shot at, but a lot of times you didn't. Most of the times we got shot at when we were leaving a LP or OP or a patrol base, which are sort of the same thing. Um, we didn't do a lot of LPs on this deployment. LPs are more for like an urban environment, or not, sorry, not an urban environment, more of like a jungle environment or a forest environment, where you're basically, you can't see that far because of the forest. So you send a fire team out and they set up an LP, and their whole mission is just to listen. So it's a listening post, and they're there and they're being super quiet, and they're doing really good light discipline. It's the middle of the night, and they're listening for a unit moving through the woods. A really cool example of this is if you've seen the show Pacific. There's a scene where a squad gets punched out, or maybe it's a whole platoon, and Chesty Puller, who's a famous Marine, is the battalion commander, and the LP calls on the phone and is like, "Hey, you got the whole Jap army coming your way." And so the colonel knows, okay, there's about to be a huge attack on the main defensive line. And when you're out there, you're kind of exposed. So a lot of times we use LPOP as like one word, kind of like PCCs, PCIs. It sort of is like one thing. And an OP is an observation post. And so this is something where you actually have a good field of view. And this was something that we did a lot more in Iraq. And so this is basically because it was an urban environment and we weren't really doing any patrolling or any, there wasn't anywhere to hang out outside. It was a very dense urban area. So we would find a house that looked like it was tall enough to see, and we would take over the house, which the way that the rules were was they had 60 seconds to answer their door or else we broke it down. So knock on the door. Usually an Iraqi person, man or woman, would answer the door, and we'd basically be like taftish, which meant like search. So we'd come in, we'd do a quick search of the house, Um, almost never found anything. Like, very rarely did we find anything. And the people were always very polite. I mean, we were the occupying army, and we were very heavily armed, so it doesn't surprise me that they were very polite. But we'd move them in, and we at the beginning we'd like make sure we kept a really close eye on them and kept them in like one room, like asked them, we weren't like pushing them into a room and then like holding them at gunpoint. We were just sort of like, hey, can you hang out in this room while we're here? We're gonna leave. um if we ever broke anything, we usually gave them a little bit of money. We never left trash. Like, we always brought trash bags, and any of our MRE trash we'd always pick up. But we would set up some sort of a watch rotation, and it basically turned the house into a mini fob. So you'd have people resting. You'd have me with the radio, almost always listening to the radio. But then you'd have people up in the windows looking out in all directions. And this was actually pretty chill because, we'd patrol for 20 minutes and then we'd hang out in a building for an hour or two, and then we'd get up and we'd patrol again. Um, and we almost, my platoon, my squad, I don't think we ever got attacked when we were actually in a house. I think the best time to hit us when we got hit a lot was when we were getting up and we were like leaving the house. So they knew we were in the house. They they called their buddies or notified whoever they need to notify, and guys would move in. And so as we'd be leaving is when we'd get ambushed real quick with either pop shots or like a hand grenade or something like that. It was just a good time to hit us because basically they're insurgents, so they get to decide when they attack us and when they don't. And I kind of alluded to this: when Marines are in like a fight and we're showing up with everything, the bad dudes don't do too good. So they like to catch us with our pants down, kind of a thing, when we're discombobulated, like we're trying to start the formation up, or we're all kind of stacked up inside the walled compound, the yard of the house, and we're about to punch out the gate and get back rolling on the street. Because even when we're patrolling, we're still really good at reacting to contact front, contact right, left. So they like to hit us when we're kind of like halfway across the danger area, or uh, like all bottled up coming through a gate or something. And it was pretty amazing how good they were at timing it, because I feel like there's a lot of variables that have to go into that. They're moving around. There's other squads patrolling that they're dodging, and they're a lot more formidable enemy than I think anybody in America really knew. And I don't think that the media or the government or the generals, I like to blame the generals a lot. I think that they kind of wanted to paint this really positive picture about what was going on. And like, no, these dudes are organized and they know what they're doing. Um, try not to get political with this podcast unless it pertains to this, my experience in combat. So another thing, which you could kind of say is interchangeable with LPOPs, were patrol bases. And so this kind of became more prevalent towards the end of the deployment, where, because we went from patrols where we do like 2 or 3 patrols a day, like 4-hour patrols. Basically, it eventually evolved into 1 2-week patrol. So, um, we would leave the wire at the first day of our 2-week patrol cycle, and we'd be out there until 2 weeks later we'd come back. And we would get resupplied by the mobile units. They'd come and drop off MREs to us and like pick up our trash and stuff, and or pick up anything that we didn't need. They bring us water because we always had cases of water bottles. Um, but when sometimes, because we were out there for so long, we obviously needed places to rest, and not even just for like a couple hours. Like, we actually would go, all the squads would be out at once. So the whole platoon would be patrolling around 2 different squads moving around, and we would set up a patrol base where we'd have you know, the whole platoon in one house, and then from there we would patrol out of that and come back to there. And then we'd move the patrol base every like 12 hours or something like that. And then we'd have small unit sometimes even smaller than a squad, like just a fire team out patrolling around, like a small security patrol around the patrol base. It just, it's you got to be random, because if you have a schedule, that's the other thing. Is if you have some sort of set schedule where you're, every day at 3 o'clock we leave the wire and we walk these exact blocks. Yeah, you're all gonna die, because they're all just observing us all the time, and like writing down when we leave, where we go. So everything was random. And in the patrol base, that so kind of the more long term stays at these people's houses was one thing that's kind of interesting, is that when we'd come into houses in the middle of the night, they'd all be sleeping. And so we try to be quiet. So we try to sneak in if we could into their house, or we'd knock on the door quietly and we'd come in, you know? And they all had like fully furnished houses, but none of them slept in the beds, it seemed like. It seemed like they would all just kind of be, and this might be because there was no electricity at night. We turned the electricity off every night because we controlled the hydroelectric dam, so we would turn it off. So not every house had a generator, and those that did, it's a small little generator, and so they were working like one little heater. And they had this like certain type of heater. It kind of looked like a jukebox, or like a pachinko machine, I think they're called. Like it had like the design was sort of the same, but it was like a little, about the size of a radiator in an apartment building, like a old brick apartment building, and it had infrared heater on the front that kind of pushed heat out, and then it also had a little area on the top for like keeping drinks warm, or even cooking stuff. You could like we'd cook cans of soup on there and stuff. Um, but we'd come into the house and the whole family would just be in a pile, like in front of that heater only. And so we would let them, we'd always have some Marines awake, and then we would all punch out and find places to sleep, which included usually like right in these people's beds. We would just like go in their master bedroom, and there'd be like two or three Marines sleeping in their bed. Pretty messed up, in hindsight, but or all over their couches, or a lot of them had these like, they would have a room just full of the little pads. Uh, that would like fold out, so it'd be kind of like a little chair, and then you'd fold it out and it'd be like a little, not a cot, but it'd just be like a pad that lays on the floor to give you a little bit of cushion. And so the best sleep we got, the most rest we got was, well, besides K3 and TCP, was definitely on these patrols, because we'd come in these houses and we'd be sleeping on like a nice couch, or in like an actual bed, stuff like that. A lot of times we'd like hang out with the people if it wasn't the middle of the night. We'd hang out with these people and we'd talk about stuff. And it was funny because it would be like, who invented electricity? Saddam. Who who invented this airplane? Saddam. Because Saddam basically told his people that he did all this stuff, and famously in the Battle of Fallujah, you can find pictures of it and stuff. There was an amusement park that actually had a lunar lander, and it said USA on it, and it was like a ride, you know, in Fallujah. And like, the story behind it is the people in Iraq were told that Saddam Hussein himself designed and built the moon lander and gave it to us so that we could land on the moon. Um, so yeah, these people's view of history was kind of skewed because Saddam was such an oppressive asshole. Um, Also, it was weird because you'd meet veterans from Desert Storm. You'd be in their house and you'd look on the wall and there'd be like a picture of them in Desert Storm, or there'd be like a painting that they painted of Desert Storm. There was one that was pretty funny where it was like a Iraqi soldier cutting the head off of like two dragons, and one of the dragons had a uh, police hat from the UK. Isn't there like a certain name for the police in UK? I don't know. I'm drawing a blank, but the constable, they'd have a constable hat, and then the other one had a uh, Uncle Sam hat, and it's like a dragon, and he's like cutting it off. I thought that was really cool, and it's funny because my dad fought in Desert Storm, so I'm like meeting the other side of that war. So yeah, we would chill, and then we would punch out smaller patrols from there, and then we'd ask for resupplies and stuff like that. When it was time to come back in the wire, which was either after our small patrol, a couple hour patrol, or then later in the deployment after 2 weeks, same thing. We'd be coming close to the base. We'd call them up, request permission to enter, and how many bodies we've got, so that we don't get lit up in the middle of the night by somebody on post who's half asleep. Um, and then we'd sneak in the wire. We'd all go condition 3, which condition 3 basically means you take the round out of the chamber, you pop your magazine out, you take the round from your chamber, put it back in the magazine, put the magazine in the bottom back in your magazine well in your rifle. Condition 3. Then we'd go and we'd do a debrief. And this became a lot less serious towards the end of the deployment, especially after 2 weeks. Like, what's the debrief? It's good, like 5 minutes. It's like, hey, I think we need to work on this a little bit. But during the really hot time towards the beginning of the deployment, it was a really good time of, hey, this is when you'd bring up, like, did anybody see anything suspicious? When we got hit with that grenade, did anybody see anything leading up to that that's important? Did anybody see anything after that that's important? Um, we'd also kind of critique ourselves. Hey, you know, on that ambush, we didn't move quick enough, or when we found that IED, people were way too close to it, or we didn't do a good job of, keeping the civilians from getting too close, or, this was just our basic 10, 15, 20-minute talk on uh, how the patrol went, what we could work on, yada yada, stuff like that. And then we'd also do a gear inventory. So we'd use that same checklist of all the stuff that we had to bring with us. We'd say, okay, show me this. And this was actually a little bit bigger, because it was like, hey, everybody hold up their M16, and they knew how many the squad was supposed to have. Everybody hold up their uh, your night vision. How many we got? Everybody hold up your laser that attaches to your rifle, and then you'd show it. Different things like that. And we'd make sure that we had everything that we left the wire with, radios included. Um, and then we would uh, either jump right into doing a working party. A lot of times we'd get home and there'd be chow. The cooks would be making some food, so we'd get like right from the debrief. We'd go grab chow, um, which was always nice. And so yeah, uh, that's the general layout of a typical patrol. And if you have any questions, leave a comment below. As always, check out my podcast. Um, check out my YouTube video. And if you like it, share, like, subscribe, all that stuff. And thank you for listening.